Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at Wachtel and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be nerding out about some development standards and their relationship to sustainability. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGO member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And if you want to hear more GovLove, you should become an ELGO member. Your membership helps support this podcast. Now, let me introduce today's guests. Jonathan Wachtel is the Sustainability Manager at the City of Lakewood, Colorado, a position he's been in since 2014. And before taking on his current role, he served as a sustainability planner at Lakewood for about 8 years. He has a master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Colorado at Denver. And Caitlin Long is the senior sustainability planner for the City of Lakewood, a position she's been in since 2020. And previously, she served as a city planner for the City of Commerce City, Colorado. She's in that role for about 8 years, and she has master's degrees in urban and regional planning and urban design from the University of Colorado at Denver. So with that, welcome to GovLove, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Cool. So one way we like to allow our guests to warm up a little bit and let our listeners get to know you is through a lightning round. So I've got a few fun questions to get us started. And Jonathan, I'm going to make you go first on the first one. But what was the first concert that you went to?
Oh, man, when I saw this question, I got nervous about telling the truth about it. I'd love to say that it was when Fish came to town in my small university town I grew up in Illinois. But actually, a few months before that, I went to an Ice Cube concert with some friends. So that's my first adult, concert as not a little child.
Nice. That's just as cool as Fish. Caitlin, what about you?
I am a certified millennial, and my first concert was the Backstreet Boys, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. So there you go.
Awesome. All right, Caitlin, I'm going to make you go first on this one. So what book are you currently reading?
I have been reading a lot about permaculture design for Western arid home landscapes over the last several months, kind of getting ready to do some summer planting and all that. So I've been reading a variety of some different books and blogs and whatnot in that general genre. And I can't think of any off the top of my head, but if I do, I'll let you know.
Perfect. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it is that time to get the plants in the ground. Jonathan, what about you?
Oh, man, I have to admit I've been, checking out of the serious topics when it's time for books. So I've been reading, like cheap spy novel books just to, give me some entertainment. Either that or, working through the Magic Treehouse series with my 5-year-old. That's probably the book I read the most.
Nice. Magic Treehouse is a classic. All right, Jonathan, we'll make you go first on this one. What's the last thing, movie, TV show you watched?
Well, like probably a ton of other people, I'm on the Ted Lasso train, waiting for the next episode to come out. Maybe that's today. That drops on Wednesdays, I think.
Great. Awesome. Caitlin, what about you?
I'm also on the Ted Lasso train. That's what we watched last night. We are a little bit behind. We're on the current season, but are not fully caught up. So no spoilers, please.
No spoilers. All right. No spoilers. All right. And then, Caitlin, for the last liner question, where do you go for inspiration?
This was the question that made me nervous about the lightning round, because I could not think like, oh my gosh, where do I go for inspiration? I had to ask my husband, and he told me that I just find it everywhere around me, and that when we travel and go to new cities or even are just driving around our own city, I'm always looking around and seeing what looks like it's working well, what looks like it's not, and envisioning ways that could be better or could be adapted for a different situation. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of just, I'm always looking around and observing and thinking about what things are going well and getting inspiration from just the world around me.
Yeah, very nice. I'm sure lots of listeners can relate to that. Jonathan, what about you? Where do you go for inspiration?
I usually get my next big ideas or some clarification on the big challenges while on long bike rides. There's something about that. The zen you can get into, let your mind kind of wander freely. That helps me find the next spark.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's a little exercise, distract you from the task at hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then one thing I always like to ask about, and Jonathan, we can make you go first on this one, but I want to hear from both of you. What was your path to local government? How did you kind of end up in this field and then working for the City of Lakewood?
I love this question. Growing up in the Midwest, I spent a lot of time doing wilderness trips, which is counterintuitive for probably most of the Midwest. But we would always take these long trips up to northern Minnesota, the Boundary Waters, or out west, and do these wilderness trips as a kid. And so I came out to Colorado to go to school with the idea that I was going to work in public land management, natural resources. But towards the end of my undergraduate experience, I had a professor who taught a land use class, and he was a planning commissioner, and he sent us on this 3-day field trip experience where we would have this map and all these instructions. We'd drive out on this highway to a certain mile marker and get out, and the question would be about what kind of crops we're growing and whether they were irrigated. Then there'd be a stop at a landscaping company to ask about a certain pile of rocks, and maybe a day and a half later on this crazy winding road trip, you'd find yourself at a quarry where some of those rocks were being mined, or at some place up in the mountains where there was a water diversion taking place, moving water from the other side of the Continental Divide to the next irrigation system. And that exercise just opened my eyes to this complexity of land use, of how all these systems were intertwined, and kind of went beyond putting a fence around a wilderness area and trying to protect it. And so that really sparked my interest in land use planning, looking at those big systems. And so that's how I ended up deciding to go to grad school to be a planner, and eventually ended up here at the City of Lakewood working on planning and sustainability.
Very cool. And Caitlin, what about you? What was your path to local government and then to Lakewood?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Denver area. I'm one of the rare natives that you find in Denver these days. And so there's just been so much change that has occurred in Denver over the last 30 years that it's a completely unrecognizable city. I think a lot of people would agree from the late or the early 90s to now. And being just kind of growing up with all of that change happening, it was always really fascinating to me seeing what was happening as we're driving around or taking the brand new light rail downtown to the Rockies for a baseball game. And in high school, I had the opportunity to take a human geography class, and that's what opened my eyes to the whole land use and site selection process. Why do certain things go certain places? And at that point is when I decided that I was going to get into city planning. And I took a little bit of a roundabout, broad approach in my undergrad because Colorado does not have an undergraduate planning program, but I knew that I was going to eventually have to go to grad school. So I dabbled around in history and environmental science and sociology, how do people relate to the environment, and then used all of that to go to grad school and get my master's in urban and regional planning. And I was really drawn to local government because it's where the actual change in the built environment occurs. That's where your permits get approved. That's where the construction happens. And if there's a meaningful difference to be made, that's where I think is one of the key places that you can do it, and especially in a more consistent way across a broad area. Whereas someone who's in a really innovative design firm, yes, you can do some great projects, but they're going to be a little bit more piecemeal. There's one location here and another location there. And so that's why I was really drawn into local government as a career path overall. And when Lakewood had the sustainability planning role open up, I was super interested because I've always wanted to get more back into the sustainability and environmental science side of things. And it just seemed like a really natural fit. And it's been a great 3 years ever since.
Very cool. Yeah. And you're previewing why I wanted to talk to y'all, because that role that local governments can have on the built environment, how that ties into sustainability and battling climate change and all that, like that. I think that's fascinating, and it's to your point, a way that local governments can have a big impact on that if they want to.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners that haven't been to Lakewood before we get into the nitty gritty of what we kind of wanted to talk with y'all about today, can you, I don't know if one of y'all want to take this one or not, but can you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about Lakewood? Like, just give us a sense of the city and kind of what they would see if they visited, or what they should see.
I think I can give the overview of that.
Yeah.
We're a suburb of Denver. We're due west of Denver, on the so if any of you have been to Denver and you are, sitting on a rooftop, maybe enjoying one of our great micro brews or something like that, and you were looking towards the mountain, you were looking over Lakewood. We're about 150,000 plus people growing, so closer to 160 now, I guess, and about 50 square miles. And we have, I think, 113 parks. So a huge percentage of that land area is actually parks or protected open space. Wow. We're relatively young as a city. A lot of Lakewood developed as, developments in Jefferson County. And so we incorporated in 1969. So only a little over 50 years as a home rule municipality. So a lot of kind of neighborhoods that all have their own identities, and, a lot of, kind of post-World War II construction on parts of the city. Parts of the city feel just like a more urbanized portion, especially closer to Denver. And then we've got, kind of some of your typical suburban style development. But at this point, we're pretty built out. So everything really, most development happening in Lakewood at this point moving forward is infill.
Yeah. Okay. Infill and redevelopment. Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. And so just, I know we're going to spend most of the time talking about your guys' updated sustainable development standards, but just to, I'd love to know a little bit more background on kind of the sustainability work that happened in the city, maybe before those were implemented, and kind of what that, I know you guys have a 2015 sustainability plan. So some of that background on like the context around these standards specifically, so I don't know, Jonathan, what were some of that work in sustainability that Lakewood was already doing before kind of moving into the development standards kind of piece of this?
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be here for this full journey into the realm of sustainability planning, at the local government level. We started, like a lot of cities maybe, with an internal committee of, passionate staff members that wanted to, kind of bring issues of sustainability and climate change, to everyone's mind in terms of the work we were doing. And we also, through our planning department, in the maybe 2012 or so, started a sustainable neighborhoods program, which has been highly successful in engaging residents to really kind of roll up their sleeves and bring their expertise and passion. It's really exercising collective intelligence. That was really successful in building community support and showing how much the role a city could really have and its residents could have in advancing sustainability. So that was really the roots. And by 2014, there was enough momentum to really create a dedicated sustainability function in the city. And so that's when we rolled up our sleeves to build a formal sustainability plan. It's really, sustainability and climate action plan. It's time to update that, but it was a really solid plan with a tremendous amount of community support, and expertise that came to the table. So it's really done a good job of standing the test of time. And it ranges on topics, everything from climate change and adaptation, energy and water and built environment, to, building a sustainable economy, waste, public health, of course, transportation. And then, even though it's more of a topic everyone's talking about now, we actually have a pretty robust section on ecosystem-based adaptation and leveraging ecosystem services and natural systems to help build our community sustainability. So it's a big plan. It's a little bit maybe too big, pretty overwhelming. But we've been, it's been our work plan since 2015, and we've just been chipping away at it, piece by piece with the resources we have, trying to move the needle as best we can. It's got, over 30 adopted targets. And that approach of, I think it was the first time in Lakewood anyway, that we really had these targeted goal, not just goals with lofty language, but actually, numeric targets associated with that. So that's been helpful to kind of keep ourselves accountable and keep our leadership and our city council asking us, either, wow, we made this goal, that's great, or how come we're not moving the needle? And that's really helped us build our momentum and help build our staffing and resources.
Yeah. Measuring and showing that you're making progress probably has a huge impact on momentum. So I'm curious, you mentioned the neighborhood sustainability program. What or sustainable neighborhoods program? What was part of that? Was it just kind of education and engagement, or what made up that kind of early success?
Yeah, we could probably do a whole nother session on that if that ever presents itself. But the idea for sustainable neighborhoods came from a couple sources. One was that there was this huge demand for the city to be doing more in the realm of sustainability, but we didn't have that as an official function. And as one of the staff people that had started this internal committee, I was getting all those requests, funneled to my voicemail and email. And a lot of those sounded like, something to the effect of, hey, I'm a master gardener and I don't know why the city's not, building more, community gardens or teaching classes on composting. You guys should really do that, or I'm a retired engineer from the Renewable Energy Lab, which is right here in our backyard. And the city doesn't have any resources to help community members, put solar on their rooftops. Have you guys thought about, building out some kind of function or doing some workshops? And at some point, it was like, well, sounds like you'd be a perfect person to do that, with your expertise. But, and so it's like, how could we create a space where people could actually share all these skills and interests they have in a way that doesn't, kind of bring up too much risk to us, by empowering residents, which is, something we talk about wanting to do, but oftentimes, we get nervous about it when it actually turns into action. And the second piece was, as a neighborhood planner, in the comprehensive planning role that I was in at the time, we would do these big plans. We had light rail getting built through our community, and we'd lead these planning efforts around, light rail stations and trying to get everyone on board for transit-oriented development and increasing density. And it was a journey each time to bring folks together from those neighborhoods, cut through all the fears and misconceptions and build trust and education and really get a vision together. And then we'd have this plan and it was like, okay, thanks. Appreciate all your support. And it never felt like there was like tasks or things to have these residents actually do. Now they were bought in, right? Now they were enthusiastic. So the program really was designed to help residents, help us fill our gaps and give residents like meaningful opportunity to help, see the vision that they helped create, come to fruition. And so we help these neighborhoods that apply when we have capacity. We take a couple at a time, identify the skills and interests in their community, identify the kind of projects they want to work on, and then really they do most of the work, and we have one staff person dedicated to just kind of helping them think through their projects, connect them with resources. So this is everything from, building community gardens to hosting a garden tour of people's, backyards, or a group of residents, training to be literacy volunteers in a local school, or, special waste collections. I mean, you name it, and really it's self-determined by these residents. And over the decade we've been doing that, we've had, 90,000 participants and over 1,000 projects completed all by residents. So it's a pretty cool program, and it really built a ton of support in the community that's helped us pretty much every step of the way when we've needed more resources or had big policy, like what we're going to talk about, bringing some new land use regulations or policies or programs to the community. These residents have really been there. Either it was their idea or some version of it was their idea in the first place, or they're there to really provide that public support as we take it through the process.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Yeah, you're building that, that grassroots support for kind of future things without even knowing it. That's really cool. Yeah. So I guess transitioning to kind of the sustainable development standards, like what made you guys say, we've got this sustainability plan, we've got this comp plan. Now we need to like make some changes to zoning ordinance. Why was that kind of important to meet some of that vision? Because I think I know the answer, but I would bet most probably residents were like, why would you need to change all this land use stuff? So I'm just curious, like how you guys made that pitch and like what that connection was.
Yeah, I think Caitlin will do a great job of kind of getting into the nitty gritty. I'll just set the table a little bit, which is that I mentioned the sustainability plan. We had all these action steps and ideas on what we could do. And so one of the first things we did was scan all of those goals and action steps to see, what was the right mechanism or tool in our toolbox that we could use to move the needle on those. And there were quite a few that seemed like things we might be able to address with some tweaks in our zoning code or our building codes, right? And some of that's obvious, I think, to people in this field that, you want buildings to be more energy efficient. An easy way to do that is updating your building code so new stuff gets built, more efficiently. So we started tweaking those things. Sometimes it had to do with just like, what kind of waste containers had to be provided on new development, to add recycling and compost streams and things like that. But at a certain point, we kind of stepped back and realized that the building code, could only accomplish so much. Small changes to development standards or land use regs definitely were important, but there was something a little more holistic that was missing, and that was to really think about how new development integrated into its surrounding land use in a way that was a little more context sensitive, which is hard to do with a typical zoning code that kind of has these standard zones across the city, and most of our rules for stormwater management or for transportation, those are kind of like big standards that apply across the city and don't leave a ton of room for negotiation or context sensitive solutions. And like a lot of places, especially in Colorado, the growth pressure is intense.
Yeah.
And that causes a lot of backlash in the community with a lot of anti-growth sentiment. And, we sat here thinking maybe part of the issue here and the pushback with growth and, building enough housing that we really need is that we're not asking enough out of these developments. They should do a better job being an investment in our community and not, just perceived as an investment for a developer. And so the real idea behind our enhanced development menu, which I think we'll talk about, the greenhouse gas emissions budget, or performance standard, was how do we make sure that the new development really is an investment in a community, and why would we allow anything new to get built that's just going to like exacerbate all of these challenges we already have, right? If we have these big greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, and we let new buildings go up that aren't going to be efficient enough, or aren't going to have the right integration of transportation or electrification of both vehicles and the building and other elements like that, then we're just giving ourselves more work to do to hit these 2030 goals for emissions reduction. And so it's just kind of common sense, really. Like, why would we do that? Like, let's make sure everything going forward isn't more of, adding on to the problem. Let's make sure that these things align with these commitments that we've made. And so that was really, really the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's taken a lot of steps. We had a first version of this a few years ago that was only applied to the largest buildings and was a little simplified. But incrementalism can be a really important tool. And so getting that started into the door, getting everyone used to it, and then having our planning commission, our city council say, we want you to report back, tell us how it's doing. And in that, while we were doing that, people were getting more and more excited and asking us if we could do more than we were doing. And that's what led to this really big update that just happened.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I want to get in the nitty gritty of the update. Caitlin, I'm curious, is there anything you would add to that? Or maybe, I know you were involved with a lot of the engagement with the community. I'm curious about how you talked about that connection too.
Yeah, I think that the big picture, the comprehensive plan and the sustainability plan are these big vision guiding documents, but they aren't actually regulatory. And so the levers that we have to be able to implement that vision are in other tools, codes, regulations that exist throughout the city. And that's where Jonathan mentioned that we did a scan of all those things. And since our sustainability division is located as part of the planning department, the zoning code is one place that we have a little bit more control over, and so more ability to influence in that way. And so the initial iteration of the enhanced development menu that was adopted in 2019 that was before my time, but I was definitely part of this whole update and amendment process, and we made this a bit more robust and farther reaching to make sure that the new development really is reflecting that vision that we have had for so long and are still not quite getting there. And so it's a good step to try to achieve that.
Yeah. So when you were like set out to update these, I assume there was some community engagement component. Like what did that kind of look like, and how did you kind of get feedback on those, on maybe the original standards versus maybe where you wanted to go?
Yeah. So there's a couple of interesting twists that this all took. The original standards were developed through a pretty robust community engagement process at that time. And so there was a whole outreach process that they went through at that point in time. And then, as Jonathan mentioned, we were asked to provide regular updates on how things are going. And so we had this regularly planned update session that we were planning on presenting to Planning Commission and City Council right around the same time that a citizen advisory body that we have here called the Lakewood Advisory Commission was preparing to present to council about one of their ideas for some updated development standards to look at renewable energy and ways to increase renewables across the board for new development, but then also generate some revenue to help retrofit existing low and moderate income families with their housing so that they can reduce their utility costs. And so those two things kind of aligned, and we were able to then leverage the support from the Lakewood Advisory Commission, as well as the support that we had from the previous public outreach process that was done, that we were just reporting back on. And we created a task force of members from the Lakewood Advisory Commission, from that committee that had presented about renewable energy mitigation programs. And we included members from the community, including we sent just a blast out to through our newsletter network, which includes a lot of those sustainable neighborhood participants, to see who was interested in getting engaged. And we had a local group that is really invested in clean energy efforts, and they wanted to participate, so they helped us out. We had someone from the local housing authority help participate with us to make sure we weren't going to be significantly impacting their new developments that are coming forward and not impacting affordability in a way that we weren't intending. So we were able to get a lot of these different groups together, and they helped us develop the framework that we put these different standards in and figure out a way of what's fair, what's reasonable, and what's going to have a good impact going forward. We touched base with them throughout the process as we started developing actual code language, but they were really instrumental right at the beginning, and then again at the end as we were going through the adoption process, and several of them came to speak to City Council, and we're very supportive, and we're very grateful to them for all of their efforts through the whole process.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. And quite the diverse set of views too. So what are the sustainable development standards? What kind of impact do they actually have on kind of new construction in Lakewood? What does that look like, I guess, tangibly?
Sure.
For y'all?
Definitely. The sustainable development standards are contained as one article of the overall city zoning ordinance. Mm-hmm. So it's part of any new development review that occurs. And this article itself has 3 components to it. We've talked a little bit about the enhanced development menu already. That's one piece. The greenhouse gas mitigation program is the second piece. And a third piece is some supplemental standards to support construction and demolition waste recycling. The actual standards for C&D recycling are in the building code from a few years ago as part of that initial push to start putting some of our sustainability initiatives in other codes. But some additional strengthening requirements are now in the zoning ordinance as well. And generally it applies to any type of new development.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends a little bit which specific piece of the program we're talking about, but in general, any new construction has to touch something out of here to reduce the impact of that development overall on the city, whether that's making sure it's a good investment in its specific neighborhood in the city, or reducing its emissions, or making sure that its waste is in fact appropriately recycled.
Yeah, cool. Well, and just because I've often worked on process improvement projects for planning departments, so I'm curious, are these all things that our staff review, kind of just, hey, it's very clear standards and we just check the box and say they meet them or not, and or is there some discretionary review that's part of these as well?
These are all administrative. It's all part of just the standard zoning requirements that any new development has to abide by if they're going to get their approval for their new proposal. There are certain aspects of it that are a little bit more flexible. The enhanced development menu, for example, does have an open option where if there's not something in the menu but could still have a significant impact that an applicant wants to propose, then they can certainly do so. And that's a little more internally discretionary, and discussing with staff, is this really appropriate? Is that an appropriate impact in order to achieve what they're wanting to out of it? And there is an opportunity for that to go to Planning Commission for approval if they're wanting more points than what is allowed at an administrative level.
Okay. And so you've referenced the enhanced development menu. So I think I understood from looking at your website, and we'll be sure to link to kind of all the materials that you guys have, because I think it's pretty interesting. But so can you talk through, like, I'm a new developer, I come in with my plans, I want to build, I don't know, a 4-unit apartment building. Like, what are the things that I would have to do to kind of meet this development menu?
The enhanced development menu is intended to be a really context specific and more holistic part of sustainable development, more holistic interpretation of that. And so it's a point-based menu where, depending on the size of the development, a certain number of points have to be achieved from the menu. And each item that's in the menu, it's a variety of different types of sustainable development features, could range from renewable energy to public art. So it runs the gamut of different things that really engage the community, create a good sense of place, and achieve the different goals that we have in the sustainability and the comprehensive plans. So once you figure out how many points you need to have based on the size of your development, then you can pick from those items that are in the menu, and staff helps with that as much as the developer wants us to throughout that process. We'll make some suggestions of items that might make more sense for a given context. Probably doesn't make as much sense to have bicycle amenities, for example, if it's a really suburban type of context, but maybe that is more applicable for your apartment project that happens to be near the light rail line. So we can make suggestions based on the specifics of a particular project. Go ahead.
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah,
I think Caitlin's underselling how much creativity she and some of our colleagues brought to creating these menu choices too, because it's a little bit of like a adaptive creative space for us to try new ideas and new concepts for the developers as well, and we can see if anybody chooses to do those to advance some of the kind of ideas and goals in our comprehensive plans, our sustainability plans that have never been really codified. So or maybe are not fully proven technologies or things like that. So developers can earn points for low carbon concrete, for using for adaptive reuse of spaces, for using recycled materials in their in their construction, or even adding food production on site. And we have a certain point structure for a number of square feet of irrigated garden space based on the number of units, as a percentage of units. So it's like this, everything kind of under the sun. And then depending on the locations, as Caitlin said, there's these other options. Like if it's an area that we're trying to do enhanced streetscapes, they can earn points for that. So it's really a bit of a choose your own adventure. And what's really been fun is watching other departments at first kind of think this was really just our sustainability division tool, kind of having their light bulb go off and say, oh, well, so we could suggest they do, fill in the blank, public art or, connect the rest of this bike path nearby that we haven't had before. And all of a sudden, it's really fun to watch the rest of the organization kind of get behind this and bring their ideas. And Kaylin did a really nice, robust process internally to collect all those ideas and help everyone see the possibilities. And that's been one of the things that's been really successful, I think, in these standards.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun working with everyone else and trying to figure out how we can just push the envelope a little bit in a voluntary way, since no one has to choose any particular item. So they're able to be, it's intended to be flexible and what makes sense for a development. But if there's creative ideas and there's room for innovation, and we can accommodate that through the enhanced development menu.
Yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, when you said public art at first, I was like, wait, what's the tie to sustainability? But you're right. It's getting those other things in the comp plan and then tying kind of the other work that you want to do in the community. I think to your original point around making sure the new development was part of the neighborhood and like fit in with like kind of what you guys are trying to do in Lakewood. That's really cool. And the flexibility's got to be kind of fun as a planner, I would imagine, Caitlin.
Yeah, absolutely. No two projects are the same. There's a few items that we've seen pretty consistently, which is great. And it signals that maybe that's an item that just needs to be a regular code standard rather than something that's a fun option for them to choose. But we'll evaluate how things are going down the road. And in the meantime, yes, it's definitely fun to work on all these different opportunities that they're presenting for us.
Yeah. What are the things that people always suggest or always incorporate?
We've been seeing a lot on the waste side, which is great to see. A lot of multifamily developments in particular are proposing to include recycling and compost contracts for the residents for at least the first 2 years that they're open. So that's been really exciting to see. And at a minimum, that's at least meaning that they're installing the space that exists and then providing the service for 2 years. So it will hopefully remain long-term. But if nothing else, then the infrastructure exists so that down the road, if they, for whatever reason, choose not to do collection service anymore, the infrastructure exists to be able to do it again in the future. And then another option that's been really popular and also makes a lot of sense here in the arid West is hydro zoning for their landscape and water budgeting. And those are both items that were in the original version of the enhanced development menu as well. And we figured out with the water budgeting how to ratchet it down a little bit to incentivize increasingly lower water usage without it being so low that it really is just a field of weeds that we're incentivizing.
The front yard of River Rock.
Yes.
Very cool. And so also part of these standards and you mentioned this, I think, when you were talking about them at a high level, is the greenhouse gas mitigation program. So how does that work? How does that kind of take it in? How do you guys implement that, and what does that look like?
Sure. The greenhouse gas mitigation program is intended to be more of this, it's less subjective, it's more objective based on the raw data of a building is going to have projected emissions for its operations. Mm-hmm. And new development that's coming into the city needs to offset the emissions that they will be generating that exceed what our city's adopted climate targets are for 2030. And so we built this amazing calculator in-house. Our colleague, Jeff Wong, did a fantastic job incorporating so many different data sources as locally as possible to create this calculator that will tell people what their performance standards should be based on the type of use, the square footage, and the number of residential units. And then it also projects the emissions for that, and whatever that discrepancy is between the projected emissions and the performance standard is where we have some room to help them figure out mitigation strategies that can be incorporated into their plans. And those mitigation strategies also overlap with the enhanced development menu, so they can earn points from the EDM for things like renewable energy and electric vehicle chargers, and providing that compost service. But they can also then get emissions mitigation credit for those items to reduce their project's overall emissions. And if there is still a gap between the projected emissions and the performance standard, once we get through all those mitigation strategies, then there is a fee in lieu that applies for that remaining excess emissions. But our goal is for projects to be designed such that there is not a fee. We want good design ultimately. Yeah. That's the goal of the program, but it might not be possible in every case. And so in the spirit of flexibility and working with people, there's also this alternative option that then provides some funding for the city to do emissions mitigation in other ways that can help the overall built environment have less emissions in the long run.
Yeah, very cool. I'm curious, like, I know you mentioned there's probably a need to update your sustainability plan. Have you guys talked about kind of adjusting your, greenhouse gas emission targets and kind of and will that kind of affect this program if you guys are saying, like, back in 2015 the target was this, but now it needs to be a little bit lower? Will that kind of impact this program if you make those kind of changes?
That you're really sharp on this stuff. That's a great, very informed question. We our original greenhouse gas emission targets are actually not sufficient to do our fair share of the Paris Accords. So actually and we actually had a couple different targets in that original plan, a 20% target, that was a little bit more, near term, and a 50% reduction target by 2050. And neither of those were really good targets that we set at the time. And that 20% target, we actually, I think, might have been one of the first in the country. We didn't just randomly kind of pull that target out of the air. We had done all this planning, year and a half of planning and all these different working groups, and we hired a consultant to basically take all of the implementation strategies that were in our kind of final draft of the plan and assess what would happen, how they would impact greenhouse gas emissions reductions if we successfully implemented those. And so, we looked at other cities that had, energy efficiency strategies or, tree canopy goals and all those types of things to see, like, what they had actually seen in terms of participation and impact. And then we applied our own emissions factors and utility data here. And so that's how we actually got to our original 20% target. It was, if we add up all these strategies and we implement our plan, we know we can get to this 20%. And then we set this lofty, let's get 50% reduction by 2050, not realizing, at the time, like, we were going to get further and further behind as a world and need to make it, need to get to be much more aggressive than that. So all that's to say is that actually, since the adoption of the sustainability plan, in the meantime, we did make additional commitments through different pledges, Global Covenant of Mayors, the ICLEI 100, where we, really signed on, and our mayor committed to us adopting a science-based target. And so actually the science-based target is, which is really a reflection of what we have to do our fair share for the Paris Agreement, is 61% emission reduction below 2018 levels. Wow. While our original was 20% below 2011, I believe. And so while our numbers look great to that first target, it doesn't look as hot for that science-based target. But we codified the science-based target through this code. And so this greenhouse gas mitigation standard was established using that science-based target. Basically, on the commercial side, we figured out our per square foot emissions, where we would need to be across the city to hit that target. And that's, the basis for, there's other parts of the equation, but that's the main piece of the equation for, you're getting your budget, so to speak, or your performance standard for commercial. And on the residential side, it's a per capita calculation of where we need to be by 2030.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at.
Huh. Very cool. No, that's fascinating. So Caitlin, you also mentioned the construction and demolition waste program, the diversion program. And I say this as there's a construction going on across the street from my house, and I can see the large dumpster that's overflowing. So I'm curious, why was that an important one to include? And then what are some of the requirements associated with that?
Yeah, the original standards were adopted back in 2018 in the building code, and it's specific materials that were required to be recycled based on what recycling facilities are available here in the Denver region, as well as what there's a market to actually recycle, so that these are reasonable materials that we require. And specifically for this area, it's concrete, asphalt, metal, untreated wood, cardboard, and then if there are salvageable materials or excess finished material types of products, whether that's sinks or things like that, the windows, doors that are being removed from an existing building, those can be donated or recycled appropriately. Or if there's excess tile and that kind of thing, then that can be recycled as well. And what those standards have been in, as I mentioned, those have been in existence for a while. We've been monitoring the compliance with those, and it's been pretty lackluster. A lot just, it's kind of a back of the napkin waste management plan sketch that gets submitted with permits. And so we decided that it was time to try to ramp up enforcement of that a little bit. And one of the things that we wanted to do with that, in addition to just reviewing the waste management plans a little bit more closely and effectively, we also added for larger projects that are also going through these other pieces of the Sustainable Development Standards. There is a deposit and refund system that's been established. We've yet to have any projects quite reach that stage yet to where we're using it, but it exists. And that would be so that there's a little bit of an incentive, a carrot and a stick a bit, in that they pay a deposit upfront that's a performance surety that they're going to comply with their approved waste management plan. At the end of a project, they submit back their receipts from the recycling facilities demonstrating that they did in fact recycle what they said they were going to recycle. And then they will get a refund based on how well they're actually complying with their approved plan.
Yeah.
Hoping that that'll just provide a little bit of an incentive for contractors to pay attention to what they're throwing out. Does it really need to go in the landfill dumpster, or can it go in a metal container that's going to get taken to a more appropriate recycling facility?
Yeah. Interesting. No, that's fascinating. Go ahead.
It's such an interesting topic to me, the construction and demolition waste. Our colleagues at the City County Denver did a study a few years ago, and it showed that 50% of waste going to landfills was from construction and demolition.
Wow.
And, we spend so many communities spend so much time on recycling, right? And, curbside pickup and all those things, while very few people have been paying attention to this massive stream of materials that, not, in the big picture too, like, oh my gosh, these things have so much embodied energy, right? Like there's so much that has gone into these materials, and that could be redone, but it's just, there's no structure for it. There's very few facilities. It's a logistical nightmare to try to sort these things out. And, we're learning so much as we go through this. Like Caitlin and I went on a tour of a deconstruction project, in our nearby community of Boulder. They have some, they're a little further ahead on this, and they've got deconstruction standard. And we went on a tour and learned like these most nuanced things that totally fascinated me. Like if you're ripping up hardwood floors and they were nailed down, it's easy to take the nails out, fairly easy, and reuse that wood. But if they were glued, they have to go to the landfill. They can't be repurposed. And so I think the whole C&D thing is like this next journey that, we're kind of entering into to figure out, oh my gosh, there's so many complexities to what should be, something that I would hope will become standard practice, that we are able to disassemble and, remine our urban environments for all these valuable materials. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, and in a place like the Denver area that y'all are in, like with so much growth, yeah, that volume of construction materials is like even greater than it would be in other places. Like
Yeah.
I'd imagine. So yeah. So those three programs are really cool, and I can see how they all work together and make sense to help kind of achieve the visions that y'all have. I'm curious. One thing I didn't, I think you guys might have mentioned at the top, but didn't hear as we were having this conversation was what's been the relationship or reaction from the community in terms of affordability and how these standards might impact that and maybe increase the cost of new construction or increase the cost of housing, because I know that's a problem everywhere, but especially in a place like Denver that's grown so much.
Yes, affordability is a very hot topic across Denver and particularly in Lakewood as well.
Yeah.
And it was something that was in the front of our minds as we were developing these standards to try to make sure that there weren't any negative impacts that we weren't foreseeing. And that's why we included one of our local housing authorities in the task force that helped guide all of this. And I think there's a few different pieces of this that we tried to incorporate to make sure that there was going to be a minimal impact, if any. One of those is that the housing authority let us know that just given the really stringent financing requirements that they have for new projects, that they would more than likely have to meet most of these standards anyways, just to be able to get their financing, that the design requirements for new affordable construction is so high that it would more than likely be able to satisfy these requirements without having to go super far. They've been looking at just doing lead buildings for the most part over the last several years because that's an easier way for them to make sure that they're hitting all of those checkpoints that they have to get the financing to work out.
Interesting.
On the more individual side of things, we think that what we're hoping to see is while there may be the increased construction cost in the short term, that the long-term utility savings for the actual tenants and residents of some of these buildings will be a way to help promote affordability. We'll see how that actually goes, and it's something that we're planning on monitoring once we get some projects that are actually up and running there. But that's one of the things that we're really trying to achieve. Yeah. And then with some of the different fees in lieu that would be coming out of these projects, we would anticipate that those would be used to help retrofit existing buildings, and particularly focused on those in low and moderate income parts of the city to try to retrofit them and make them more energy efficient in order to reduce those utility bills and make them healthier places for people to live in general. I think those were the three big ways that we tried to make sure that we were taking affordability into account with this. Certain types of projects are also, affordable projects are exempt from having to meet certain parts of the enhanced development menu. If it's affordable square footage, that square footage doesn't count towards the maximum that they have to earn points for. So if it's something that's a wholly affordable project, then they don't have to do the enhanced development menu at all. And if it's partially affordable, then they only have to do enhanced development menu points on the portion that is market rate.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we tried to incorporate a few different strategies there.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Well, and then, hearing kind of to implement this seems like a lot of work on the plan review side and kind of going back and forth with developers. So I'm curious, both Jonathan, like what you thought the impact would be, and then from both of you, what is the actual impact like in terms of staff time of like making sure you guys implement this, and like what did maybe the plan review process go from to make this happen, because there is a lot of back and forth and creativity involved, which takes staff time. So I'm just curious on that staffing aspect, what it took.
Well, I'll let Kaylin's in the trenches here working on it. And I will say that the first version that we mentioned, in 2019, we didn't bring in any new staff, and I knew that there was going to be some moans and groans because of extra work falling on other parts of the city. And that, I think for anybody in a sustainability or climate office or in an innovation role, anytime you bring new ideas or changes to pre-existing and longstanding workflow, you're going to get a certain amount of grief, and you need to work real hard to build trust and provide support. But you can only, without adding more staff, you can only do so much, right? And I think that's a challenge that in the journey I've been in, I've learned a lot from maybe, some mistakes in the past, about when you get people on board, bringing them into the fold. And so I think this time around, that was also, on the forefront of our minds. You go into these things and you don't want to exacerbate other existing challenges, right? And so affordability is one of those. Building momentum within the organization to move us all forward together is another one of those. So that was big. And this time through, we really, said from the very beginning to our colleagues, to our planning commission, to the city manager, to city council, this can only happen. We can only take this step if we bring in staff to help implement it, because it's not realistic and we won't be able to be successful if we try to do it with our existing resources. So that did get approved, and we've got a new person on board, and Caitlin can talk a little bit about the actual time commitment maybe that they're putting into this.
Yeah. I think as far as the old version of the enhancement menu goes, I came from a development review background in planning. That's what my previous role was. And so I was able to take on those projects that came in, and they were relatively few and far between. But a big part of our goal with these updates was to expand the applicability, make it more universal. And in doing so, we also wanted to make sure that it fits into the existing processes that we have in the city as much as possible, to try to minimize that extra burden across, especially other divisions that are not directly in tune with what we're trying to accomplish here. And with bringing someone new on board, it's been super helpful to be able to look at things in a bit more detail and a bit. She's been really helpful right now with getting the permits a little bit more under control. I think we did not anticipate quite the volume of building permits that we were going to be taking a look at with trying to just enforce the existing C&D requirements. And that has nothing to do with even the new code standards. It's just that since we were going through this process and we wanted to be more involved in that part of the review, we decided to do that at the same time. And I think that has been a little bit of a surprise in how much there is to that. And I think it's just a reflection of, for one, that there is a big need for the C&D recycling part of all of this. And we've got some big plans for some additional staff, hopefully going forward, that can help with some of that, as well as just the, I guess, just kind of how the sustainability field is going in the Denver area, with looking at circularity and trying to bring these different aspects of the economy all together, from waste to construction to job training, and how to bring all of those pieces together in one place. And C&D, I think, is one example of how we can really achieve that. So there's a lot going on there, but I do think that it's been going well so far, and we happen to have a really supportive staff in other departments that we're all looking for ways to make the process more efficient and more timely and a little bit better integrated than I think it has been in the past. And everyone has been on board with that. And so it's been a really good experience so far, trying to make it the best that we can, recognizing that we're all working towards the same common goal of achieving what the community's vision is.
Yeah, no, that's probably a good lesson for anybody listening that wants to do something similar in their community. Is like taking a look at the process as part of this, and then also making sure you add staff to implement. Yeah,
definitely.
Nothing will get you, shut down the next time you have an idea. Like, you get a bunch of people on the hook to do a bunch of work that you gave them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, especially in the to your point, Jonathan, sustainability and climate action and innovation work, where often you don't have dedicated staff always, and so finding ways to not just dump work on other people is probably good. So I'm curious, you did the update. What's been the reaction kind of both from the community and the developers in Lakewood around kind of the new program now that it's up and running and you guys are implemented?
Honestly, I've kind of been waiting for the other shoe to drop still. We haven't heard a ton about it. The community has been very supportive. They've always been very supportive of sustainability efforts. Our council has been supportive of sustainability efforts. So there was really no trouble in that way getting any of this passed. And I think so far there has not been any pushback that I'm aware of from developers. It's just these are the new standards, and that's what we're going to review your project against.
Yeah.
And then I think trying to be as helpful as we can during especially these first couple of years, providing resources and talking through a lot of things with them will be helpful and hopefully start making it just a bit more common practice as they get through the first project and into maybe subsequent projects in the city.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. And then, I'd be a bad podcast host if I didn't ask. What about kind of, so these standards apply to new development, and that makes a ton of sense. That's where the city can have a lot of control over what gets built. But what about kind of existing development? Is there kind of a thought on like, how do we bring up maybe older buildings to these sustainability standards that we're looking for to meet those long-term climate action goals and greenhouse reduction goals? So what's kind of, do you guys have a plan for some of those existing buildings?
What are your ideas? Because we're looking for those. I mean, I think, there's like this constantly with our work. I feel like there's the two buckets, right? There's like, well, how can we do things the right, not the right way, but how can we do things better in the future, right? Not like we tried to create problems in the past. We were designing for what was good at the time, and we've just learned over time what the unfortunate impacts are of that. But so it's like, let's stop making the mess and find a better way to do things. Is we can do that with everything new moving forward. But there's this other, and in a place like Lakewood, I mean, we're pretty much built out. So what do we do with everything that we have, the legacy construction and infrastructure and systems? And I think every community wrestles with that part of this. So in our Article 13, which is the article Caitlin mentioned, where this lives in our zoning code, as we took this through the community process, as we took it to Planning Commission and City Council, every time we showed this framework, like here's Article 13, and here's the enhanced development menu and the greenhouse gas emission mitigation program and the construction and demolition waste, we had this fourth grayed out bubble in our graphic that said, future building performance and benchmarking standard. And so we started communicating at that point that the next step here was to come up with the right mechanism to, monitor building performance long-term. That everything we were doing right now was about that point in time when we were building new, but that we needed a mechanism in place for, what happens over time with buildings. And it's one of the most effective, types of programs that other communities have put in place to crack this really tough nut of the existing built environment and getting it more efficient and retrofitting it. So that's what's coming next, right? So we're underway working on, standards for reporting energy and water use, for determining, performance standards, but all that's in the very early stages. It hasn't gone, we haven't even initiated public process. So that'll be coming next. So I think that's the big vision, at least from a code perspective. Like a lot of communities, we have a lot of, from our utility, from our regional utility, there's tons of rebates and efficiency programs and community-based organizations working on retrofitting lower income households and things like that. So, but it's, what we have in place now is not going to get us there. So we have a lot of work to do, and we will work on the policy side. We'll continue to work with our local organizations and leverage what we can from the utility rebates and things like that. And I think, whatever funds we do collect, and Caitlin's mentioned this, that will, that we can put towards helping retrofit the built environment, hopefully we can pair that with, and multiply those dollars by, going after a lot of the federal funds that are now available and working with the utilities, and take a dollar and multiply it by 10 once you pair it up with all those utilities and incentives and rebates and federal dollars, and see if we can't really ramp up that effort this really, really hard challenge of retrofitting.
Yeah. No, I think you nailed it. That's like, I mean, you guys are not alone in struggling with this, but pairing what you already have and what you're trying to do with kind of the federal dollars that are coming down the pipe, I think will hopefully make a dent in all of that. So very cool. And then what's next? What do you guys, you might have already given away this question a little bit since in your last answer, but what are you guys working on that our listeners should look out for? What are you guys working on over the next, 6 months or a year that folks can learn from?
I'm obviously with the benchmarking I just mentioned, but I think I gave away my answer to this earlier when I talked about the C&D and like this kind of light bulb on the circularity issues of our built environment. I really think, we need to take a far more holistic view of all of the materials and, and the flow of those materials through our communities. I mean, all of our greenhouse gas emissions and most of our peers' greenhouse gas emissions and national and regional and all that are rolling up are really ignore, consumption-based emissions and all of the goods and materials that flow through our communities. We wrestle with recycling markets and contamination and all those things. And that, is kind of the tip of the iceberg should wake us up to think, how do we, think about things from, their creation through their useful life, through a second useful life, to the point where then we, can remanufacture them, and can we do that more locally? And so, it's not going to happen in a bubble in Lakewood, but I think the momentum for all, kind of urban planners and sustainability work is, a regional approach, thinking about circularity in our systems, how to really, take valuable materials, get them repurposed, build an economic engine around it. So I really think that's a huge challenge, and we'll start, we're starting that process just with the construction demolition waste adventure, and then, looking at other material markets in a regional capacity and statewide capacity here in Colorado. So that's on the top of our minds in terms of the next big kind of innovation space for us.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, that is probably a good place to wrap up. So I have what is usually the hardest question for guests. And since there's two of you, you guys can either each pick and give an answer, or you guys can come to consensus. But if you could be the GovLove DJ and pick a song as our exit music, what song would you pick for this episode?
Caitlin, did you come up with one?
I did not. I defer to you.
This is so hard. First I drew a blank, and then I thought of a couple different ones. But I'm going to go with, there's John Hartford has had an old song called the Steamboat Whistle Blues, and it's he's got a portion of that song that talks about progress and watching a city all grow up. Changing the landscape, and then, and it's kind of like this, inevitable progress, and maybe it's good, but then he drops this line in there about, the grass is all synthetic and we're not quite sure about the food. And it, always just gets me, because it's like this dichotomy of progress and then maybe too much progress, and how you manage that. So Steamboat Whistle Blues is my final answer.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, we'll get that queued up, and thank you both so much for coming on and talking with me. Jonathan and Caitlin, I really appreciate you guys nerding out and sharing the nitty gritty of kind of these standards and talking about kind of your work in Lakewood. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. This has been fun.
Cool. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach GovLove online at elgl.org/GovLove, or you can find us on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. And you should subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. If you're already subscribed, go tell a friend, a colleague, your neighbor about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. With that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government. I just looking at the Waterways Journal with the steamboat whistle.
while the city's grown up, where it looks all square like a crossword puzzle on the landscape. It looks like a trick shaver now where the courthouse used to be.